know, guys, I've been a long time hideout, always reading other stories, but never imagining I'd have one to share myself. Yet, here I am. My name's Adam. I'm from California, and recently I discovered something that shattered my world. My wife, Susan, has been unfaithful. Before you jump to conclusions or throw out the usual just leave her advice, I hope you'll hear me out. This isn't your typical story of betrayal. Susan and I have been married for 6 years. Thankfully, we don't have kids, which feels like a small mercy right now. She's always been a bit of a puzzle, beautiful, sharp, and full of this magnetic confidence that draws people in. But she's also stubborn, a master at twisting situations to suit her, and, as I've come to realize, not always truthful. At first, the lies seemed harmless, little fibs I shrugged off. Over time, though, they grew into something I couldn't ignore. I told myself it was part of her charm, that she didn't mean any harm. Now, I'm not so sure. A couple of months ago, things began to feel off. Susan got overly protective of her phone, laughing at messages she wouldn't explain. Suddenly, she started working late much more often, though her marketing job rarely demanded extra hours. Then there were other signs. She began dressing up for work, wearing heels and makeup, which felt out of place for her usually casual office. And our intimacy suffered. While we didn't stop being together completely, something had changed. It felt more like an obligation to her than something she wanted. At first, I thought I might be the problem. Maybe I wasn't doing enough to show her I cared. So I tried everything. Date nights, surprise gifts, even couples yoga. That was a disaster, by the way. But nothing worked. She just grew more distant. Then last week, everything came crashing down. Susan left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, but a message from someone named M caught my eye. It read, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." My heart dropped. Shaking, I scrolled through their messages. It was all there. Months of flirting, secret meetings, and explicit exchanges I wish I could unsee. The man, Max, is her coworker, the same Max she's casually mentioned countless times. Max is so funny, or Max had this great idea for our campaign. Turns out Max isn't just funny, he's also sleeping with my wife. I haven't confronted her yet. I don't know why. Maybe it's shock. Maybe it's some irrational hope that I've misunderstood. After reading those texts, I put the phone back where I found it, sat down, and stared at the wall for hours. My mind raced, but one thought kept coming back. I'm not done. I won't just walk away and let them win. I'm hurt, angry, and heartbroken. But I'm also determined. If Susan and Max think they're getting away with this, they've got another thing coming. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know this much. I'm not going down without a fight. Stay tuned. You can't even imagine what I did to her and Max anywhere else in the world. After reading those texts, I felt like I'd been yanked out of my own body. It's strange. If you'd asked me before this happened how I'd react, I'd have said I'd lose it. Scream, break something, maybe even confront her in a dramatic showdown. But instead, I just sat there, completely numb. It was like someone had hit the mute button on my emotions. My brain switched into overdrive, skipping right past the hurt and going straight to analysis. Questions flooded in. How long has this been going on? Why would she do this? The one that stung the most. How did I not see it? The signs were there, clear as day. The late nights, the phone glued to her side, the sudden effort to dress up for work. But you don't want to believe it. You tell yourself stories to make it all make sense, to avoid facing the truth. By the time Susan came out of the shower, I was on autopilot. She walked downstairs, hair wrapped in a towel, wearing her robe, and smiled at me like everything was normal. It made me sick. I wanted to explode right then and there, to shove her phone in her face and demand answers. But I didn't. I played it cool instead. "Hey, everything okay at work?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She tossed out some vague response about deadlines and her boss being difficult. I nodded, but inside, I was seething. Watching her lie so effortlessly was like seeing her in a new light, cold, calculated, and completely unaware that her mask had slipped. That night, I couldn't sleep. She, of course, was out like a light, completely at peace. Meanwhile, I stared at the ceiling, cycling through anger, sadness, and this strange, hollow feeling I couldn't shake. Betrayal, I guess. It's one thing to feel like your marriage isn't perfect. It's another to know your wife is sneaking around with someone else. But here's the thing. As much as it tore me up inside, I wasn't ready to just walk away. Not yet. I've always been the bigger person, the guy who avoids conflict and tries to do what's right. But this time, no, they weren't getting off that easy. I wasn't going to let them move on like nothing happened while I picked up the pieces. They needed to feel what I was feeling. The next morning, I made up my mind. Confronting Susan now would only give her the upper hand. Instead, I'd wait, plan. If I played this right, I could unravel her little fantasy world from the inside. Susan and Max, they're the type who thrive on their own egos. I figured I could use that to my advantage. If I can make their relationship implode, I wouldn't even need to lift a finger. It's almost funny, in a twisted way. While she was busy sneaking around, thinking she was so clever, I was sitting there plotting how to dismantle everything. If that makes me sound cold, maybe I am. But after what she did, she doesn't get to walk away scot-free. Well, I spent the day researching. It's incredible how many ways there are to catch a cheater if you're determined enough. Hidden cameras, tracking apps, even phone cloning software. Part of me felt dirty just looking into it, but another part, the part that pictured them laughing at me, was all in. I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. They made their choices, and now I was making mine. My first step was simple. Gather evidence. Not to blackmail her or anything like that. I don't want to break the law. But I needed leverage. If everything came crashing down, I wanted to be the one holding all the cards. I ordered a couple of discrete cameras online. They should arrive in a few days. Until then, my job is to keep up the act. Smile, laugh, pretend like everything is fine. Let Susan think she's getting away with it. Meanwhile, I'll be setting the stage for a reckoning she'll never see coming. I know some of you might think I'm crazy or that I should just leave. Maybe you're right. But right now, this feels like the only way forward. I don't just want to move on. I want justice. Stay tuned. The real story is just beginning. The cameras arrived 2 days later. Tiny little gadgets, barely the size of a matchbox, and they sync directly to an app on my phone. High-definition video, motion detection, the works. Honestly, it's a little unnerving how easy it is to get your hands on stuff like this. I set one up in the living room, tucked neatly into the corner of a bookshelf. The second went in the kitchen, hidden behind some random knickknacks. Those are the two places where Susan tends to make her calls or sneak texts when she thinks I'm not paying attention. And then I waited. Let me tell you, pretending everything is normal while knowing your wife is cheating on you is absolutely draining. Susan kept acting like everything was fine, or at least fine for her. Sweet one moment, snippy the next, always glued to her phone. It didn't take long before the cameras caught something. A few days after setting them up, I left to run some errands, and Susan was home working. Later, I checked the footage. There she was, sitting on the couch, laughing at her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She didn't look stressed about work. She looked like someone flirting with her boyfriend. I fast-forwarded through the recording, watching her expressions. The smirks, the lip-biting. It made my blood boil. And then, the jackpot. She actually said his name out loud. Max? You're such a dork. Gotcha. That night, while Susan was asleep, I took things further. I installed software on her laptop that let me view her browsing history, even if she tried to delete it. Yeah, it sounds extreme, but at this point, I wasn't holding back. She broke our vows. I figured all bets were off. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There was an email chain between her and Max, complete with flirty messages, photos, and plans to meet up. They'd been using his fancy downtown condo as their little love nest. Real classy. I even found fake calendar entries, phony meetings she'd created to sneak off and see him. Seeing it all laid out so clearly hit me hard. It was one thing to suspect, it was another to see it in black and white. But it also gave me resolve. There was no more guessing or doubting. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a full-on affair. And now I had the proof. Still, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I realized if I wanted to really take this apart, I needed to understand the whole picture. That meant digging into Max. Turns out, Max is exactly what I expected. Loud, cocky, and desperate for attention. His LinkedIn profile is practically a shrine to himself, full of buzzwords and self-congratulatory nonsense. Then I found his social media, and it was even worse. Gym selfies with captions like "Rise and Grind," pictures of his bright red Tesla, and shots of his condo's killer views. It was cringy, but also revealing. Here's the kicker, though. Max isn't as successful as he pretends to be. A quick search showed his company is bleeding money. He's not some hotshot executive, he's just a guy clinging to a flashy image. I filed that little detail away for later. For now, I focused on gathering more evidence. Over the next week, I caught Susan on camera texting Max, calling him, even snaking out to meet him. I had it all: videos, screenshots, timestamps. She thought she was so clever, and yet it was all so obvious. The hardest part was acting like I didn't know. I smiled, laughed, played the part of the clueless husband while she dug herself deeper. At this point, it's not just about catching her. It's about setting the stage. I want her to feel safe, to think she's in control. Because when I finally flip the script, I want the impact to knock her flat. Next step: getting closer to Max. So I made my next move: befriending Max. Max and I had never actually met, but thanks to Susan's casual mentions of him and my own research, I knew enough to make it happen. He struck me as the kind of guy who lived for attention and praise, and I planned to use that to my advantage. One afternoon, I swung by Susan's office, coffee in hand, pretending to surprise her. Of course, I timed it perfectly so I'd accidentally run into Max. I spotted him right away. A tall, cocky guy with perfectly styled hair and a suit that screamed, "Look at me." He was standing near the reception desk, chatting loudly with a coworker. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to him with a friendly smile. "You're Max, right? Susan's always talking about you. I'm Adam, her husband." His face lit up like I'd just handed him a trophy. "Oh, hey, yeah, I'm Max. Great to meet you, man. Susan's mentioned you, too." Liar. I knew damn well Susan hadn't mentioned me to him, but I played along, shook his hand, and made small talk. He soaked it up. By the time our brief chat was over, he was suggesting we grab drinks sometime. Perfect. A few days later, I took him up on the offer. We met at some trendy downtown bar, the kind of place with overpriced cocktails and music so loud you couldn't think straight. Max was in his element, ordering drinks and rambling about himself. I didn't have to say much, just a few well-timed compliments about his impressive career and his amazing condo, and he was off to the races. It wasn't long before he started oversharing. He bragged about his success, his commitment to fitness, and of course, his ability to keep things exciting. The way he said it made my stomach turn. This guy really thought he was untouchable. And honestly, I could see why Susan was drawn to him. He exuded confidence, even if it was all smoke and mirrors. The real gold came when he started talking about relationships. "Man, you're lucky to have Susan," he said, smirking. "She's a catch." I forced a smile, playing dumb. "Yeah, she's great. You guys must have a lot of fun working together." "Oh, you have no idea," he said, winking. It took everything in me not to knock that smug grin off his face, but I stayed calm, nodding along like I didn't catch the subtext. By the end of the night, Max was treating me like his new best friend. He even suggested we go to a basketball game together. Naturally, I agreed. The closer I got to him, the better. Over the next few weeks, I made a point of hanging out with Max whenever I could. Drinks, casual meetups, even that basketball game. The more time I spent with him, the more he opened up. It was almost laughably easy. Max craved validation, and I was more than happy to give it to him. But I wasn't just playing nice. I started planting little seeds of doubt. A casual comment here, a subtle observation there. Things like, "Susan's so competitive, isn't she?" Or, "She always gets what she wants." Nothing too obvious, just enough to make him second guess their dynamic. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on Susan. She had no clue I'd met Max, let alone that we were hanging out. I made sure to mention her sparingly when I was with him, just enough to seem natural, but not enough to raise any red flags. It was all coming together. Max trusted me, Susan was completely oblivious, and I had everything I needed to detonate their little house of cards. The next phase of my plan was going to be tricky, but if I pulled it off, it would be worth every ounce of effort. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and I'm serving it with a heaping side of chaos. Now it was time to start poking holes in their little fantasy bubble. Max is one of those guys who thrives on praise, but is shockingly insecure underneath the surface. All it took was a few well-placed comments to start planting seeds of doubt about Susan. During one of our bro hangouts at some overpriced brewery Max insisted was the best in town, I decided to drop the first one. You know, Susan's always been super ambitious, I said casually, swirling my beer like I cared about craft brewing. She's got this knack for getting people to see things her way. I guess that's why she's so good at her job. Max raised an eyebrow, curious. Yeah? What do you mean? I shrugged, like I hadn't just baited him. Oh, nothing bad. It's just strategic. If she wants something, she finds a way to make it happen. It's actually pretty impressive. Max laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that hides overthinking. Yeah, she's definitely determined. And just like that, the wheels were turning. People like Max can't stand the idea of being manipulated. They want to believe they are always in control, the ones calling the shots. I just given him a reason to wonder if maybe he wasn't. At the same time, I started working on Susan. Subtly, of course. She'd see through it if I came at her directly. One night at dinner, I brought up Max in passing. Oh, Max seems like a pretty flashy guy, I said, cutting into my steak. Bet he's the type who always needs to be the center of attention. Susan paused, caught off guard. What? No, Max is just confident. He's good at what he does. Sure, I said lightly. But confidence and arrogance can look pretty similar sometimes, don't you think? Not saying he's like that, but something I've noticed with people who talk a lot about their accomplishments. She frowned, but didn't argue. Perfect. I didn't need her to agree with me. I just needed her to start questioning him. Over the next week, I kept the pressure on. With Max, I hinted that Susan might be more interested in his success than him as a person. With Susan, I suggested that Max might not be as smart or successful as he liked to pretend. Neither of them confronted me outright, but I could see it was working. They both started acting a little more defensive, a little more guarded. The best part? They didn't suspect a thing. Max still thought I was his buddy, and Susan still believed she had me fooled. Meanwhile, I was carefully dismantling their trust in each other. At one point, Max brought up Susan during one of our hangouts. Do you think Susan's competitive? He asked, trying to sound casual. Oh, for sure, I said, leaning back in my chair. She's great, but she definitely knows how to play the game. That's probably why she's so good at marketing. It's all strategy, right? Max nodded, but he was clearly stewing over it. On the flip side, Susan started making little comments about Max. He can be a bit much sometimes, she said one evening when I asked about her day. I was going on about his car or his condo. It's like, okay, we get it. I just smiled and nodded, letting her vent. The cracks were forming, and I was happy to help widen them. Now that I'd planted the seeds of doubt, it was time to move on to the next phase of my plan. I needed something big. Something that would push them over the edge. And trust me, I'd been planning the perfect event to bring everything to a head. Hey, Reddit. I'm back with the next chapter of this increasingly wild saga. By now, I'd successfully turned Max and Susan into ticking time bombs of paranoia and suspicion. Max was starting to second-guess Susan's intentions, and Susan was growing more annoyed with Max's ego. All that was left was to light the fuse. I decided the best way to blow it all up was with a big public event, something they couldn't wriggle out of or keep under wraps. After some brainstorming, I landed on the perfect idea. A party to celebrate Susan's recent work success. She just closed a major deal at her firm, and it was the perfect excuse to gather friends, family, and of course, colleagues, including Max. The party wasn't just a celebration. It was a stage, and I was setting it for their ultimate downfall. To get things rolling, I casually floated the idea to Susan one evening. We should throw a party for you, I said while flipping through channels. You've been working so hard, you deserve it. She lit up instantly. That's such a great idea. We could invite everyone, coworkers, friends, even some of your friends. It'll be so much fun. Oh, it was going to be something. Over the next week, I threw myself into helping her plan every detail. We rented out a beautiful space at a local restaurant, hired catering, and sent out invitations. Naturally, Max was on the guest list. I made sure to play the role of the supportive husband who wanted to meet her coworkers. Susan didn't suspect a thing. In her mind, she was orchestrating this perfect moment to bask in the spotlight. Little did she know, to really set the stage, I needed to add a couple of key players to the mix. First, I reached out to an old college friend of Susan's, Dave. He's the type of guy who always got a little too much of Susan's attention in the past. I casually mentioned the party to him, saying, Susan would be so happy to see you. She's always saying how much she misses catching up. I laid it on thick, and Dave happily agreed to come. Next, I subtly planted the idea of Dave in Max's head. During one of our hangouts, I mentioned Susan's old college friend Dave might be at the party. They're pretty close. I left it at that, but Max's expression told me everything I needed to know. He was already stewing. The final piece was a bit of digital sabotage. Using a burner phone, I crafted a fake text conversation posing as Max's new girlfriend. The messages were a perfect mix of flirty and incriminating, with just enough personal detail to make them convincing. I scheduled the text to hit Susan's phone during the party. The trap was set. The night of the party, everything went off without a hitch. The venue looked amazing, Susan was glowing, and the guests were in high spirits. Max showed up about half an hour in, all charm and confidence. I greeted him warmly, still playing the part of the clueless husband. Then Dave arrived. As expected, Susan's face lit up when she saw him. She pulled him aside to chat, laughing and touching his arm a little too often. It wasn't blatant, but it was enough to get under Max's skin. I watched from across the room as Max's jaw tightened. He was clearly simmering. Then came the pièce de résistance, the fake texts. Susan's phone buzzed, and at first she checked it casually. Then her face froze. She quickly put the phone down, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Max noticed too. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. "Nothing," Susan replied quickly, forcing a smile, but her voice wavered, and Max wasn't buying it. The tension escalated fast. Max started pressing her, and Susan, already flustered, snapped back. "Why are you being so paranoid? You're acting ridiculous." "Paranoid? Are you kidding me?" Max shot back, his voice rising. "You've been all over that guy Dave all night. Don't think I haven't noticed." And just like that, the dam burst. They started arguing, right there in the middle of the party, their voices cutting through the room. Guests stopped talking and turned to watch as the drama unfolded. Susan tried to deflect, accusing Max of being insecure, while Max fired back about her being manipulative. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. I stood off to the side, sipping my drink. The party was already a powder keg, with Max and Susan's argument escalating, but I wasn't about to let it fizzle out on its own. It was time to deliver the final blow and turn their spat into an all-out explosion. As their voices rose, I edged closer, playing the role of the concerned, unsuspecting husband. Guests were murmuring now, their eyes darting between Susan and Max like they were watching a live soap opera. Listen, Susan was trying to defuse the situation, but Max wasn't letting it go. "You're acting ridiculous," Susan hissed, trying to lower her voice. "Dave is just an old friend. Why are you so insecure?" "Insecure?" Her face flushed red, and for the first time I saw genuine panic in her eyes. That was my cue. I stepped in, my tone calm and reasonable. "Hey, let's all just take a breath," I said, looking between them. "This isn't the place for this." But instead of de-escalating, Max turned on me. "Oh, here he is. The perfect husband. Does he even know Susan, or are you just playing him too?" The room went silent. All eyes were on us. Susan froze, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Max laughed bitterly, gesturing at her. "Go ahead, Susan. Tell him, or should I?" I tilted my head, pretending to be confused. "Tell me what, Max?" Max crossed his arms, his voice dripping with contempt. She's been lying to you for months, late nights at my place, sneaking around. She's not the person you think she is. Susan's voice shot up, high and defensive. Max, stop! You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think I do, Max snapped. Why don't we tell everyone about all those late-night work meetings? Or should I pull up the texts? Gasps rippled through the room. People were whispering now, their attention glued to the three of us. Susan turned to me, her face pale. Adam, it's not what it sounds like. I can explain. No need to explain, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I've got all the explanations I need. I pulled out my phone, opening the folder of evidence I'd been collecting for weeks. Photos, texts, emails, videos. It was all there. And now it was time to put it to use. I connected my phone to the venue's TV, thank you modern technology, and hit play. The screen lit up with a video of Susan and Max on our couch, whispering and laughing like lovesick teenagers while they thought I was out. The crowd gasped. Conversations erupting in shocked whispers. Susan clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Adam, stop! What are you doing? I ignored her, flipping through more evidence, screenshots of their texts, steamy emails, calendar entries for their meetings. Each new slide was like pouring gasoline on the fire. The crowd ate it up. Some were whispering, others openly pointing or recording the scene on their phones. You really thought I didn't know? I said, finally turning to face them. My voice was calm, measured. You thought I'd just go along, blind and oblivious? I've given you both every chance to come clean, but you didn't. So now everyone gets to see the truth. Max stammered, his usual cocky demeanor crumbling. This is insane. You're insane. I fixed him with a cold stare. Insane? No, Max. Insane is thinking you can betray someone and get away with it. Insane is thinking your ego makes you untouchable. Susan started to cry, the kind of dramatic tears she always used to manipulate people. Adam, please, I'm so sorry. Save it. I cut her off, my voice sharp. This marriage is over. And you. I turned to Max, letting my disgust show. Good luck explaining this to your boss, your coworkers, and anyone else who thought you were worth a damn. I grabbed my jacket and walked out without looking back, leaving them to deal with the fallout. Behind me, I could hear the murmurs rising into laughter and accusations, the crowd dissecting every juicy detail. Their perfect little fantasy was destroyed. And the best part? They did most of the work themselves. I just gave them the stage. After leaving the venue, I checked into a hotel for the night. I needed space to decompress and process everything after pulling off what might be the ultimate mic drop. My phone was blowing up with messages, friends, family, coworkers. Some in shock, others congratulating me on how I handled it. Turns out, the drama didn't end when I walked out the door. Here's the scoop. Max and Susan went off on each other in front of everyone. Max accused Susan of ruining his life, while Susan fired back, calling Max a pathetic loser who dragged her into his mess. Max stormed out eventually, leaving Susan standing there with her crocodile tears and a room full of people who now saw her true colors. But the cherry on top? Some of Susan's coworkers had been recording the whole thing on their phones. By the next morning, clips of their meltdown were circulating in office group chats. They became the hot gossip of the week, office scandal royalty. The next day, I wasted no time filing for divorce. I'd already prepared everything in advance because, let's be honest, there was no coming back from this. Susan didn't even try to fight it. Maybe she knew she didn't have a leg to stand on, or maybe she was too busy trying to manage the fallout I'd unleashed. Either way, it was a clean break for me. Max, though? Oh, he didn't escape unscathed. His company, already teetering on financial instability, wasn't too thrilled about him being at the center of a very public scandal. They let him go within a week. Turns out being a narcissistic cheater doesn't exactly scream team player in the corporate world. Karma at its finest. As for Susan, she tried reaching out a few times, calls, texts, the usual. The closest thing to an apology I got was, I didn't mean for it to get this far, can we please talk? Pathetic. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. A week later, I heard from one of Susan's coworkers that she and Max had tried to patch things up. Spoiler, it didn't last. Max couldn't handle being associated with Susan after the scandal, and Susan was still pissed at him for throwing her under the bus during their argument. They turned on each other, and whatever spark they thought they had fizzled out fast. Honestly, good riddance. Now, let's talk about me. I won't sugarcoat it. There were moments when the weight of everything hit me. 6 years of marriage doesn't just evaporate overnight, and the betrayal stung in waves. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, and the constant tightrope I'd been walking. I had my life back, and I was determined to rebuild it. I started therapy, which has been a game changer. I reconnected with old friends, dove into my work, and started focusing on myself. I even adopted a dog, Buddy, a loyal little guy who's shown me what unconditional love actually feels like. Turns out he's the best therapist I could have asked for. So, where am I now? Living my best life, honestly. Susan and Max, no clue, and I don't care. They're not my problem anymore. What matters is that I didn't let their betrayal define me. Instead, I took control of the situation, and now I'm building a future that's better than anything I ever had with her. Thanks for following along with this roller coaster, Reddit. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that the best revenge isn't about hurting the people who hurt you. It's about rising above it, walking away with your dignity, and creating a life that's truly yours. If you're going through something similar, trust me, it gets better. Play it smart, stay calm, and let the truth do the work for you. Catch you later. Buddy and I have some trails to explore. That said, thank you so much for watching. If you're still there, I really appreciate you for that. Please subscribe and check my other stories. See ya.